Home builders are now abandoning projects on the US housing market, like this house behind me here in Florida. There's simply too much inventory and not enough demand, and so they're having to stop construction. This is a bad sign for the housing market in 2024 and beyond. It's something similar to what we saw in the last downturn in the mid-2000s with all that overbuilding. And I think if you're a home buyer, particularly here in Florida, you're going to be seeing cheaper prices over the next 6 to 12 months. And it's this supply surge on the housing market that's now causing prices to start to turn down. For instance, in this zip code where I am right now, about 30 minutes south of Disney, the number of homes for sale has increased 500% over the last 2 years and is now at the highest level on record. And so when you see that type of surge in inventory, you know that a downturn's coming. And one of the big things we're seeing here is an Airbnb sell-off. The Airbnb investors, they bought up a lot of the homes in neighborhoods like this in Florida over the last couple years, but now they're being forced to sell because their revenues are collapsing. The incomes are collapsing, particularly near Disney World, everyone. About a year ago, Disney World, they had a big issue with park attendance. Attendance was down anywhere 15 to 20% over the summer of 2023. Since then, it's improved a little bit. However, the short-term rental and Airbnb revenues haven't. So a lot of Airbnb investors, they're losing money. And I think this is something that not a lot of people in the housing market were prepared for. You know, a lot of people were saying the last 3 years that inventory is low and that inventory is never going to increase. And because of an inventory shortage, home prices are going to stay high. However, that story, that narrative is now evaporating in states like Florida, in cities like Orlando and Lakeland. And as a result, we're just seeing very little interest on a lot of the homes for sale in communities like this. Like if you go on Zillow and you want to gauge the interest of a house, look how many saves it has. Look how many saves and how many days it's been on the market. I'm seeing houses around here that have been on the market 3 or 4 weeks and have no saves, which is wild. It means very little home buyer interest. And you know, sure enough, everyone, there's been a definite decline in the amount of people moving to Florida. You know, Florida had a big surge in migration over the last 2 years. That migration surge is now tailing off, even though if you look at the 2023 data, Florida still is #1 in the US. I think those figures are going to be way lower when the 2024 and 2025 data comes out, which is a big problem because the builders here in Florida, you can see we actually found some houses that they're actively working on. The builders here were relying on that continual inflow of people moving into the state. And with that inflow slowing, it's just leading to lots of houses that are sitting on the market where the sellers are now being forced to cut the price. And for instance, folks, these houses, if we look here, you can see they're, first of all, right next to each other. These houses like right next to each other. This is kind of typical for a new home build development in Florida. We're talking 3-bed, 2-bath houses on the market for around $350,000 to $380,000. And you know, those are price points that are just still too high. You know, $380,000, you're talking a monthly payment of $2,300, $2,400 a month at least, maybe even higher depending on where mortgage rates are. And that's actually very expensive for a retiree or someone who is moving down and buying a second or third home, or just a local living here. The local incomes are around $65,000 a year, $70,000 a year. And so the price points and the mortgage payments on these houses, they're just at a level that the local buyer can't afford, and that even someone buying a second home can't afford, which means that we're gonna have to see prices go down, everyone. And this is, you know, what's maybe a little frustrating for you guys as a home buyer out there, is that you're seeing more listings, more price cuts. You're seeing the path for lower home prices, but in many cases, sellers and some builders are slow to cut the price. That's the one thing that continually amazes me. I'll look at listings that have been on the market for 6 months and they'll only cut the price like 2%, or they won't even cut the price at all, or maybe even they'll increase the price sometimes because they have this idea that that'll trick people into thinking that there's competition and create a sense of FOMO. But that's normal, everyone. Sellers, they take a little while to get out of their own way sometimes, but eventually the fundamental market dynamics are going to rule the day. And what scares me about Florida and about many housing markets across America, not just Florida, is how overvalued home prices are. And by overvalued, I mean that the prices are just so much higher than what the local incomes in the area can afford. And when that's the case, when the prices go up above incomes and much faster than incomes, it's this telltale sign of a bubble. It means that either, excessive mortgage debt and leverage was pushing prices up, or maybe the government pumped cash into the economy, which pushed prices up, or maybe for a short period, there was a lot of wealthy people moving in that pushed prices up. But in the end, it's the local income that dictates where home prices go. And I know for some people that's a controversial opinion, because a lot of people like to say, well, my housing market is different. There's all these people moving in. There's all these foreign buyers. There's all these investors. But folks, the reality is much of those buyers have gone away in this market. The investors are no longer purchasing. Foreign purchases are at one of the lowest rates in a decade. Vacation buyer demand, according to Redfin, vacation buyer demand has plummeted. And so as more and more of these external sources of demand in the housing market go down and plummet, it leaves the local buyer as the one who has to step in and fill the demand vacuum. And that's where you get problems when the prices have gone way up above incomes. And so for instance, here in Lakeland, Florida, I'm actually in a town called Davenport, which is between Lakeland and Orlando, but it's the Lakeland metro. Home prices are around 35 to 40% overvalued compared to their long-term norms. And that means that there's potentially 35 to 40% price downside. And you can see the last time prices were this overvalued was the 05, 06, 07 bubble before there was a massive crash. Some other markets in Florida that are heavily overvalued include Orlando. Orlando's 28% overvalued. We have 34% overvaluation in Miami, 30% overvaluation in Tampa. Across the board, Florida's housing market is heavily overvalued. Now, just because a housing market is overvalued doesn't mean that it's going to imminently crash. In the same sense, just because the housing market is undervalued doesn't mean the prices are imminently going to go up. However, what you need to watch out for is if your housing market and zip code is heavily overvalued, combined with the inventory and listings surging. That's the cocktail that could bring huge price declines, could bring another massive crash like we saw in 2007, 2008 in a lot of different neighborhoods. Because when the prices are overvalued, that's telling you downside risk, right? And then when the inventory is spiking and the price cuts are spiking, that's telling you, well, actively right now in the market, there's a huge shift down. And you can see on this map I'm showing you right now the counties in Florida, and we're gonna filter the ones that are most overvalued and with the biggest spike in inventory. And you can see the result is that these are the areas where I'm predicting home prices have the biggest chance of dropping, and dropping by a lot. And so why are the builders not feeling as good about the housing market? Well, it's the fact that mortgage rates are still high. They're still sitting around 7%. It's the fact that the buyer traffic is down. It's the fact that the inventory that these builders are sitting on of unsold homes keeps climbing. You guys can see behind me, there's a lot of homes that have been recently built or about to be finished. They're empty. Well, that's a national trend, with builders currently sitting on 90,000 completed unsold homes. 90,000 homes that are for sale, completed, but empty and unsold. Just for some perspective, everyone, that's the highest level of unsold builder inventory that we have seen since 2010. And so you wonder why certain parts of this home building site are dead and empty, and why they look like they've stopped construction on certain areas. That might be why. It's because they're sitting actually on tons and tons of unsold inventory. But one shoe that's yet to drop really on the housing market, especially here in Florida, that I think might start dropping over the next 3 to 6 months, is those foreclosures. Everyone, a lot of people, they've been predicting an increase in foreclosures, including myself, over the last couple of years. It's started to happen. The foreclosures are up, but we haven't yet seen the big surge in foreclosures like we saw in 08, 09. Of course, Florida is a state where we just saw massive mortgage defaults and foreclosures in the last downturn. Across many cities and metros in Florida, the mortgage default rate hit 10% of all mortgages being in default or foreclosure. I don't think we're gonna see a 10% mortgage default rate in Florida again, but even if we get to like 5 or 6%, that's going to be severe problems for the market. We're only around 2 to 3% today. So if we just have a doubling in mortgage defaults and foreclosures in Florida, that could push even more inventory onto the market at a point in time where buyer demand is going down and inventory is already starting to pile up. So this is all, I think, good news for you guys if you're a home buyer looking in Florida over the next 6 months, over the next year, over the next 2 years. The trends in the market today, they're suggesting that you're going to see cheaper prices, particularly if you're in an area like Lakeland or Orlando, as well as close to Tampa, down in Sarasota. That's the area of Florida that's going down the most right now. in terms of lots of listings, price cuts. Meanwhile, Southeast Florida, particularly Miami-Dade County, is holding on a bit better. There's still somewhat of an inventory shortage in Miami-Dade County, so it might take longer for prices to go down there. Now, on a personal note, it's starting to rain and thunder, and I kind of forgot where I parked my car. So this is going to be interesting. Let's see if I can get back to my car before it starts completely downpouring. All right, guys, I found my car, but I did not avoid getting wet. As you can see, got rained on, still raining outside. And I thought this would be a good time to actually just like tell you guys like kind of why I go on these trips. I know a lot of you have watched my content for the last year or two. You see I'm going on more and more of these like on the ground housing market report expeditions. And it's because, you know, seeing the stuff on the ground, right? Seeing all that building I just showed you, you know, there's probably like 30 new homes being under construction here at this site, even though on Zillow there's only like 6 or 7 listed. When you see that, you realize just how big the glut of inventory is, and you know, how big the downturn's going to be, right? Especially when you can marry the on-the-ground insights with the data, you know, the data available on Reventure App that I use a lot in these videos as well. You know, when I go on these trips, I also look at all the data on Reventure App for every house or neighborhood I go to. And, you know, I see like in this area here, we have over 550 homes on the market for sale in this zip code in Davenport. I mean, that's 5 times higher than it was 2 years ago, and it's double the long run average. We've never seen anything like this. So, you know, when you look at that data and then you see the on the ground, you really get a sense of what's going on in the market. So I would really encourage you guys, if you haven't gone on Reventure App yet, go right now and just search your city or zip code, and for free, you can just see what the home value and basic inventory trends are. You know, just looking at those two data points is going to give you a lot of clarity about what's going on in the market. Additionally, we have a lot of great premium data points on Reventure App, particularly the inventory surplus or deficit, which shows you how much higher or lower inventory is in long-term norms. That really is a key data point to help you understand the direction of the market, as well as the Reventure App home price forecast score. For this area here, the score is like in the 20s out of 100. Very, very low. This is one of the lowest score zip codes in America, indicating downward price pressure. If you're a buyer, it's probably better that you wait and you see the deals that are going to come over the next 6 to 12 months. It also means if you're a seller, you know, if you're a seller or would-be seller in a housing market with a really low home price forecast score on Reventure App, it's a signal like if you were thinking of selling, you should probably do it, right? Like if you were waiting to sell, you know, and you're like maybe waiting for the market to get better, well, it's not going to get better, right? It's probably only going to get worse if the score is really low in the 20s or 30s as it continues to pour out here. That's how you can use this data to really make a more informed decision as a home buyer or an investor. So head to www.reventure.app right now and search the inventory trends in your zip code. Go to market trends, hit for sale inventory, type in your area, and then subscribe and become a premium member to access the premium data points like home price forecast, overvaluation. Understanding those data points is really going to help you make a more informed decision and to avoid, you know, buying at the wrong time and losing a lot of money. Now, I still have a couple days left on this trip in Florida. You guys are probably going to see more Florida content over the next couple days, but my next stop after this is California. I've been wanting to get back out to California, so also keep your eye out for some California content in the next couple weeks. Additionally, if you're like a realtor who's in California and you want to show me around maybe Los Angeles, San Diego, or the Bay Area, shoot me a message, find my email, and let me know. It would be good to actually have someone to tour me around some of these places sometimes. All right, everyone, until next time, this is Nick from Reventure signing off. Make sure to go to Reventure App, www.reventure.app.